Geez, we got another one. So last season, I reviewed a movie called White Glove Massive, and regular viewers will remember the absolutely nightmarish rabbit hole that fell out of that movie on even a surface level inspection. Well, the good people over at Couldnt, who first introduced me to that lament configuration of a movie, found my review of White Glove Massive and shared it in the very same piss-poor British films thread that started the whole thing. And this in turn prompted people to start sharing movies again. And what was shook loose was pretty nightmarish to say the least. But one film stood out above the rest. A film that I quite sincerely believe is probably the second worst film that I have ever seen in my life. And dear viewer, when I say that this is the second worst film that I have ever seen in my life, I don't mean it's enjoyably bad. And when I'm saying your film is almost unwatchably awful, you know that you're dealing with some industrial strength deep hurting. That movie is 2017's, or 2018's, Gatwick Gangsters. A film that is just baffling, in the truest sense of the word. This film somehow manages, in my opinion I might add, to fail almost outright in nearly every single field of the film production process. As a filmmaker, it's magnificent to behold. Like some kind of phoenix made of shite, the flame-out that Gatwick Gangsters produces across its hour and 46-minute runtime is truly one of the absolute spectacles of the modern age. It's just mesmerisingly horrific to anyone with even a modicum of passion towards the art and medium of film. I can only liken the feeling in my stomach watching this film to being akin to watching a valuable sentimental item fall from a great height onto solid concrete and knowing there's absolutely nothing I can do to stop it. There's almost a slow-motion throbbing radiance of pain and discomfort that left me longing for the embrace of a loved one, the warmth of a sunset, or the delight of a well-prepared meal. It's a bad film, at least to me it is. But I really want to take a bit of a deep dive into this one because, much like White Glove, somehow the strangeness this film radiates spills over into reality in more ways than one. So before we get into talking about the film proper, I need to take a minute to introduce you to Sally Clack, aka Sid Clack, aka Shampagne. Shampagne is, well, seemingly she's everything. An actor, model, influencer, music producer, presenter, and self-proclaimed rapper. I say self-proclaimed because I can only find one rap song she's involved in, and really it's just her talking over a beat rather than an actual rap, but each to their own, I suppose. On top of that, she also runs her own vegan-friendly cosmetic line under the name Lady Tholston, and when she's not doing all of the above, she's also working alongside her husband in boiler repair. But even with all the above going on, that's still not all. She's also a writer, producer, director, editor, special effects artist, and partial composer, with her biggest credit being that she used all of these skills to produce and star in Gatwick Gangsters. So, in order to prepare to review this film, I decided to take a look online to get a feel for what I was getting into. And after searching Champagne's name and being bombarded with all the information we've just gone through, I eventually reached her official website. And it's a truly mind-melting experience. So, seemingly the site was Champagne's official site until it got reshelled into a promotional site for Gatwick Gangsters. Oh, did I mention that Shampagne apparently built this site herself? Don't worry if I didn't, because it'll become apparent pretty much immediately. The site's a bizarre mix of broken English, weirdly placed text and images, and hot links to seemingly random content. The first page you're greeted with is a strange image that took me a hot second to realise is actually an advert for Gatwick Gangsters. Then, directly below it is the plot of the film. The entire plot of the film. Like, they literally tell you everything from beginning to end. For some reason, it's formatted as bullet points when they really didn't need to be. My personal favourite bit of the site is a section written all in caps with no punctuation that just reads, "Love films? Films out now. James Bond movie new. Love films? Look at Gatwick Gangsters. Films out now. With an appearance of MI6 dirty dealings when it comes to dealing with terrorists and London firms fighting against each other. If you love good James Bond movie, check out this fast-paced plot." Followed further down the page by, "If you are heading over to Google Films to Rent movie or movie download, click our link and download Gatwick Gangsters." Most film posters will have quotes from respected magazines on them. You know, like 5 stars or best film of the year. And Gatwick Gangsters is no exception. But it's almost like they didn't quite get the idea of what a promo quote is supposed to be, because all the promo quotes pulled for the film are from people who probably don't exist, and the quotes are nothing to do with the movie, really. I'm not joking. There's pull quotes like, "I really enjoyed seeing Bobby George play a gangster. I met him once at a darts match. He was a real gent." And big fans of Bobby George and Willie Thorne would love to see them in another film, which will be a bit difficult for Willie Thorne, unfortunately, with him passing away almost immediately after this film came out. My personal favourite I found was, "Shampagne is a colourful lady. I see she did all her own stunts. Good plot and enjoyed seeing an abundance of actors. Well worth seeing. Ah yes, I too like films where people are in them, especially if they're numerous." But it doesn't even end there, because beyond that is the exact same text written over and over again in different foreign languages, featuring a pull quote from Sid Clack, that's Shampagne, claiming that there's always a scammer better than you, and advertising the film as being available with tons of different subtitles. And this is all fairly eccentric and odd and a bit of fun to gently tease on, but if you manage to make it to the bottom of the site and click on any of the links at the bottom, you'll be moved to Champagne's trending page, which I believe is a remnant from her old official site. On there, she has a competition where you can write her a letter, please don't, alongside alphabetically listed sets of links that reveal Shampagne to be a bit of a fellow film critic. You can look up the best films on Amazon, an article that opens with a brief history of how Amazon started selling DVDs in the 90s before moving into a badly written, in my opinion, broken English article just listing movies that I think Champagne's watched on Amazon. There are tons of these on her site, definitely worth a deeper dive if you have the time and inclination, but there's just all kinds of strange subfolders. There's an article exclusively about films featuring the Cray twins, an article all about films set exclusively in London, and my personal favourite, an article called What to Watch, that when opened is just a detailed guide on how to get VH1 and HBO in the UK that basically amounts to nearly 2 pages basically saying, get a VPN. And most amusingly, after running through questionable ways to access global TV channels, the article ends by saying, please use this page to look through Gatwick Gangsters. You will not find us on VH1 or HBO as we have our own platform on Vimeo. So it's fair to say that Shampagne is a bit of a colourful lady, in more ways than one. But the reason I wanted to mention all this before talking about the movie is I really wanted to kind of set the tone for how this film came into existence. And, while this is speculation and almost entirely hypothetical, it is partially backed up by our own online presence. I do need to say that what I'm about to suggest you should probably take with a small pinch of salt. We have to go back to 2014 or 2015 to really get to the nub of this film's creation. Shampagne had been working at this point as a dancer, actor and extra for a while, and really wanted something to help boost her chances of getting better work and launching her career in media and broadcasting. So, both her dad, John Clack, and her husband or partner, Dave Manning, wrote the script for Gatwick Gangsters, the triptych having zero experience in filmmaking apart from Champagne's experiences working as an actress, with the aim of giving Shampagne a leading role in a movie that'd give her some primo tape to send out to auditions. And, between them, they pretty much wrote and shot the movie over 2015. With post-production seemingly running from the end of 2015 through to early 2017. Why did post take so long? Well, I imagine in part because there were probably reshoots, in part because neither of them knew how to edit a film and started literally at the ground floor in terms of learning curve, and in part because about partway through working on the edit for Gatwick Gangsters, Shampagne decided to turn it into something of a multimedia project. Shampagne recorded a rap track and took footage from Gatwick Gangsters and recycled it into a music video. And even more bizarrely, before the film was available to the public, but after it had had its official premiere to the cast, they reunited some of the cast from Gatwick Gangsters to shoot a novelty single for the 2018 World Cup. I really don't know why they did that. The film wasn't publicly available at that point, so why release a music video based on the film before anyone's seen the film? Anyway, the film premiered in 2017, and a short time later in 2018, it finally got a public release via Vimeo On Demand. So, no DVD or Blu-ray release, sadly. Luckily, Shampagne was sure to milk the footage they captured as much as physically possible, because a YouTube channel is absolutely filled with photo montages and collages of the behind-the-scenes photos from pretty much every single day of shooting from day one up to the wrap. There's also tons of behind-the-scenes clips, and even a few of the vlog-type videos talk about the film and where to buy it. And while official takings for this film aren't public knowledge, it does seem like the film's done at least some trade, with about 750-ish IMDb ratings, with only one way to actually see the film. And it has enough of a reputation that it could be posted on a comedy message board about piss-poor British films and be picked up by some schlub with a small but plucky YouTube channel. So, with the elongated and very odd history of this movie, which apparently took over 52,000 hours to complete, that's just shy of 6 years. 6 years for this thing. Out of the way, Dan, what in the bloody Jesusing hell is this film about? Well, that's the thing. The script for this movie is a bit fractious. There's a lot that goes on, and a whole lot of it isn't really integral to the plot. The key beats are basically this. Shampagne plays Shampagne, the daughter of the head of MI6, who's a breaker who works for several shady gangsters and off-the-record operators. She's a mover and a shaker, but her main client is a gangster called Large, a man who is rather large. Shampagne and Large have a bit of an on-again, off-again romance, but they've never acted on their feelings. Shampagne, through several shady dealings, has managed to build up a small fortune for Large, totalling approximately £100 million. But here's the rub. Unbeknownst to Large, Shampagne has taken his money and is using it as proof of earnings in order to do a deal with a Saudi king known simply as the King. The plan being that after having proven that she's got wealth and backers, the King will provide a further £500 million in order for Shampagne to purchase ownership of a bank, at which point she can effectively leave her current gangster ways and operate on an almost international level. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to Shampagne, the Saudi king is running his own operation, and this is where the script gets a bit confusing. So, I may not be 100% correct with this, but I believe he's working with Shampagne on a plan to purchase a large storage space in Gatwick Airport, where he plans to store a nuclear weapon. He plans to detonate this weapon at the airport and effectively threads a decent-sized chunk of London. He also has gold tied up with a chap called East End George, but the film is so non-committal to both ideas, I don't really know if they're trying to get the bomb to Gatwick, or the gold, or Shampagne. It's quite confusing. Anyway, as a way of fucking Shampagne off, the king gets one of his henchmen to drain Champagne's bank account, stealing the 100 million and leaving Shampagne on the line to Large. Large, meanwhile, after getting into a bit of trouble after hearing of a turf-related incident, ends up contacting Shampagne to tell her that he no longer wants to work with her. This triggers Shampagne quite badly, because she's not only currently using Large's money to fund her international takeover, but also because she's just killed a rival gangster called Diamond Larry as a way to make Large's empire a bit bigger and easier for him to manage. Not to mention the whole kind of loving him thing. Anyway, after pleading with him to reconsider, Large fucks her off completely, and one of Large's men decides to stick with her out of loyalty. It's around this point that Large checks his bank account and realises that he's been rinsed. He promptly goes out and kidnaps Shampagne and his ex-henchman, and Large and the boys torture the pair trying to find out what happened to the money. After they fail to get the answers they want, they pass the pair over to an Irish gang who continue the torturing. When Shampagne tries to prove that the 100 mil is in her account, Large checks it and finds it's empty. They're just about to kill Shampagne when Large receives a video message from the Saudi king on Champagne's phone explaining that he's stolen the money, that their deal is off and not to screw with them. And after that, the rest of the film is basically Shampagne and Large working together to try and get their money back, while also trying to get vengeance against the Saudis who took their money and anyone working under them. All the while getting attacked by rival gangs, getting tortured and being monitored by MI6. And while that sounds like a fairly coherent plot, what you've just heard there is the main plot. It's by no means the only plot. Because this film is so poorly presented, there are in fact around about a dozen separate plot lines that are going on across this film's runtime. But most of them don't really go anywhere, and any that do develop beyond a cameo appearance usually tie into the main plot for a couple of minutes and then get immediately wrapped up with everyone shouts at each other for 3 minutes and then Shampagne or Large kills everyone. For starters, we are near constantly jumping around from scenario to scenario almost aimlessly. So much so that it becomes not only incredibly difficult to keep track of everything that's going on, but the script almost seems to forget it hasn't pre-introduced elements of the plot in places. Meaning, quite often you'll have characters talking about scenarios and characters that haven't happened yet or haven't been introduced as if they have. Followed a few minutes later by those characters being introduced in painfully overlong sequences where they then establish plans that they were talking casually about only a few minutes earlier. Probably the cleanest example of this is at the very beginning of the film, in which we get a very confusing montage of shots that are spewing plot points that we really have no grasp or context for, which then cuts to something resembling a title card. And if you haven't seen the film before, like me, it's only about 40 to 50 minutes into the film that you finally realise that the opening scene was actually a selection of clips from throughout the film devoid of context or meaning. The entire structure of this script is a mess, and apparently the mass amount of subplots was intentional, because Shampagne, quote, likes loads of people on set and loads of subplots. It feels like they couldn't decide whether to go for a bomb threat plotline, a plotline about trying to launder gold out of the country, or a plotline about two gangsters losing it all and having to rebuild, so they just sort of human centipeded the three plots together alongside 24 other plot lines. These plot lines go nowhere, do little, and are designed to simply create tension and pad out the runtime. The repetition is another problem. With very few exceptions, most scenes run exactly the same every single time. We get a clip from about 10 minutes into the future, we then cut unknowingly to 10 minutes before that clip will play, Shampagne and Large will go to a building, meet another gang, ask about money or wares, there'll be a bit of a back and forth, they'll get their money or drugs or whatever, then another gang or the same gang will jump them, there'll be 3 to 5 minutes of just pointless shouting or gun flailing before either the gang take the money and wares and leave, or there's a badly timed gunfight. That's probably about an hour and 15 of this film's runtime, just over and over again. The repetition, 24 plot lines and constant jumping around from thread to thread causes a hell of a problem for the pacing, which is just all over the place in terms of setting the tone. There's not really a 3-act structure here. The film has a first and second act, but it just sort of gets locked into that second act, Shampagne and Large trying to get their money back, right up until about 10 minutes off the end, where we then spend 7 minutes in a gunfight that involves a pretty much all new cast. Why? Before doing a super quick 2-minute wrap-up for Large and Shampagne, which then cuts to the fastest end credits I've ever seen. The results are an incredibly tonally uneven production that spends much, much longer than it should have trying to establish the world the film happens in, badly, and getting hung up on trying to establish new characters in every other scene. Having seen this film twice now, I still don't know whether Shampagne was aware of the gold, the bomb, and the fact that the Saudis took her 100 mil. It just has this very bizarre way in which it's decided to introduce its audience to what's going on. I think it was aiming to be a bit mysterious and to try and make things a bit more suspenseful, but instead it comes across as border senile. When I'm watching your movie and thinking, wow, this is really reminding me of the first season of Decca from On Cinema, you know something's not quite right. And the dialogue, Jesus Christ, the dialogue. This film has two modes, peril and shouting. That's all there is. Either every character is quiet, whimpering and begging not to be shot, or it's like watching a room full of angry potatoes air fry in real time. There's no middle ground. Fuck is used in pretty much every other sentence, and 90% of the dialogue is either info dumping or setting up the next scene verbally. They'll say things like, "You killed Larry the Diamond. Fuck, but he was the owner of 20% of my money. A major broker in the field, you might say. You fucking mad for killing him. He had contacts who'll come and take you out, that's for sure. We should probably fucking see Ray the fucking Razor and talk to him about what our options are with the money we have that hasn't been fucking stolen yet." It'll then cut to them talking to Ray going, "Ray, Larry the Diamond's been fucking killed. He was the owner of 20% of my fucking money. A major broker in the field, you might say. His contacts might be coming fucking after us, so we need to know what our options are with the money we have that hasn't been fucking stolen yet." And that's the tone, calibre and quality of the writing on display here, for all the characters, for the full runtime. This script was a lesson in patience if ever there was one, and was not an enjoyable time for me. And on the direction front, it's a hot mess. In the making of that's included in the on-demand purchase, Shampagne claims that the style of this film is Running Man style. To my knowledge, Running Man isn't a style of filmmaking, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that she's referring to movies like the Bourne films or the Transporter series. But if this is a Running Man movie, it's got asthma. The line is regularly crossed, shots cut seemingly at random. The best way to describe this film is it appears to be a point-and-shoot film. As in, they knew to get a reverse shot for conversation scenes, but it doesn't seem like they knew why they needed to do that. Everything is shot for blunt function above any kind of artistic merit. Literally point-and-click filmmaking for about 95% of the runtime. I will say there are a couple of shots here and there that do carry a certain artistic flair compositionally, but how intentional that was from the director's standpoint, I can't say. For the most part, there's very little in the way of compositional consideration. If they need to film in a pub, they go to a pub, set up the tripod, don't bother to white balance or anything fancy like that, get the actors in the shot as best they can, and then go for it. Most of the results of which are soft. And, only making things worse still, the editing that's been attempted to try and spice up the lackluster direction is, to me, nauseating. Almost the entirety of the film has been desaturated, and strange half-hearted block colour filters have been applied, giving the shots a muted purple or blue quality to them. They then stuck artificial lens flares on pretty much every single shot, but they're not even good artificial lens flares. They're half opacity, just dropped in lens flares that flicker throughout the film, totally distracting from both the cine and the plot. It felt like I was watching a film from the 1920s that had been rescued from a locker that had been submerged underwater until now. It looks rough, really rough, and that's just the immediately noticeable stuff. The actual editing is atrocious too. Ultra-quick cuts result in a blink-and-you'll-miss-it experience where they're trying to cram in wide shots, mid-shots, reaction shots, reverse shots and close-ups all within seconds of each other. They use text slides that are very quick in a font that's very hard to read, both in terms of the fonts used and in the case of the title cards and credits, because they've chosen to literally use Champagne's face as the texture over the font, which makes the text almost completely vanish into the backdrop, aside from being quite creepy as well. And that's not to mention the atrocious audio issues, more on that later, and the awful use of green screen muzzle flashes and explosions that make Hollywood look like 20th Century Fox. Seriously, they just chuck them anywhere and everywhere, whether they're on the end of a gun or otherwise. This is a bad edit, possibly one of the worst ones I've seen to date in a paid production. The cine's almost as bad too, in my opinion. The lack of a creative vision means that quite frequently a lot of the film's been shot for function, which means just locked off shots being done out of necessity rather than any kind of stylisation. It's painful to watch in places because I think Shampagne, who supposedly edited this, realised that these functional shots are actually quite boring if you just cut back and forth between them within a sequence, so she shoved as many cutaways as she can get her hands on into every single scene. And the results are almost bordering coherent. There are at least a half a dozen moments in this where I completely lost the thread of what was supposed to be happening because the cine, editing and direction weren't staying on topic and were repeatedly cutting to other things. And I've come to the conclusion that Shampagne, more often than not, didn't know why we were seeing what we were seeing. I think it just looked right to her, so she went with it. And it's just unwatchable. In my opinion, at least. Performance-wise, I don't know where to begin, honestly. Shampagne and John Bagnall as Large give erratic performances. Their shout acting is better than their normal acting, but their shout acting isn't particularly great. And their normal acting, to me at least, is simply dreadful. Neither have any kind of presence, both in terms of their deliveries or in terms of their physical performance. Part of that's down to poor direction, editing and cine, but it can't be missed that part of that is just down to the pair not really being particularly great actors, in my opinion. The film's managed to pull in some relatively big names, for Gatwick Gangsters at least. We have TV critic for The Sun, Gary Bushell, who plays a character called East End George, a Cockney wide boy who helps move gold. His role is seemingly to help move some Saudi gold, and then he loses the gold to MI6, then he tries to flee the country, all while being as cockney and blasé as it's possible to be. He's a bit rubbish, honestly. He doesn't do much, he's not integral to the plot. In fact, he doesn't interact with the main plot in any way. Meh. Ex-snooker player Willie Thorne is also in this, playing a diamond salesman called The Beast. He sells some diamonds to Large and Shampagne, but honestly, he doesn't say much, barely moves, and barring one or two passive lines, the character could have been played by anyone without much hassle. He's just really unmemorable here. And how do I put this in a succinct way? The rest of the cast are rubbish. Their best is passable and their worst is abhorrent. When I can say quite honestly that the cast of this film make the cast of White Glove Massive look like RADA, you can believe you're in for a trip and a half with this thing. Barely anyone animates, almost no one has any kind of physical presence, the whole thing is just monotonous. And I know that the cast were clearly having fun with the film, and if it gave them fun memories, then more power to them. But through a mixture of poor performances, bad cine and poor direction, it's almost unwatchable to me. And finally, the soundtrack. And we're gonna need a minute on this because, holy crap, the audio is terrible on this thing, in my opinion. For starters, they're mixing audio recording sources. Some is recorded from the camera itself, some is either from a boom or an audio recorder held close to the cast, and some is VO work. But they don't even try to hide the blending. Meaning that more often than not, the sound quality will drastically change with every cut, let alone every line. They didn't bother to record room tone, so some scenes end up in total silence when the dialogue ends. The sound itself is muffled because they can't quite get the mic in the right place to cleanly pick up actor dialogue. The thick accents don't exactly help the situation either, not to mention noise from things bumping off the mic, scraping against clothing, or other external interferences. And the cherry on top of the cake, none of the audio has been mastered. At most, it's had a bit of noise reduction put on it, but other than that, it sounds like it's just come straight from the source with zero processing. Meaning dialogue regularly jumps from super quiet to super loud every time they cut, and because they didn't get one clean sound source, the actor pointing towards the camera will always be loud and clear, but rather than pull audio for the reverse actor from the shot where he was in clear line with the mic, they just used the audio from the shot with his back to the camera, meaning he usually sounds super quiet and muffled. This was one of the biggest problems the film had, honestly, because even if the script was silly, poorly written, incoherent, and constantly losing its thread, it would have at least been nice if I could hear that rambling to better try and make sense of things, rather than having to constantly rock the volume switch up and down and really strain my hearing to hear exactly what's being said. Equally, the soundtrack really is a case of the wrong music for the wrong film. It's predominantly R&B or heavy rap, which would be perfect if this was a gangster film where the majority of the gangsters were in the late 20s to early 40s, but this film's gangsters are all aged 40 to 60, and the film's main focus is more driven towards a lock, stock and two smoking barrels layer cake type gangster movie about stealing money, drugs, gold and not getting taken out by other gangsters. It really would have benefited from a rockier or more electronic soundtrack. Hell, if they're going full flights of fancy, even a classical score would have probably been quite rich and pleasant for this film. But them choosing to mainly work in rap results in there being a bit of a disconnect between the music we're hearing and the imagery we're seeing on screen. To me at least, it just doesn't work. Gatwick Gangsters was released on Vimeo On Demand in 2018, and at the time of recording it's about £7.30, which is about $10. In the past, I bemoaned White Glove Massive's decision to charge between £10 and £20, $18 to $30, for their movie. Had this film been better, or even entertainingly awful, I'd have said it was worth $10 for a punt. But in a state that borders on unfinished, I just can't really say it's worth the price point. This has £2 from a charity shop written all over it, and the total lack of a physical release was equally very disappointing. Though, probably the one good thing I can say is this film does have extra features on demand. If you buy a copy through Vimeo, you'll get a 10-minute making of and a copy of the film's trailer. But the making of really is just about 2 minutes of new information about the film, then about 7 minutes of outtakes, and then for some reason they play the entire end credits of the movie again, complete with random footage of Queen Elizabeth I. So, hey, that's something, I think. Gatwick Gangsters was, in my opinion, a total waste of time. And I'm genuinely serious when I say that this is probably the second worst film I've ever seen in my life. I think Let's Ruin Dad's Day just about pips it, because while to me this film is awful in just about every regard, at least it's passive in its awfulness. In the hands of a vulnerable child, Let's Ruin Dad's Day could actively harm or even kill a kid because of the messages it shows throughout. This film genuinely tested my patience, and it's really rare for a film to do that. But hey, if you don't believe me, go and pay $10 and test your mettle on Gatwick Gangsters. I can assure you, you'll break before the film does. Oh, and I can't hide it any longer. They tease a sequel in the serious. Help. Ah.